since heaven comes from the human race, which means that there are angels of both sexes there, and since by creation itself woman is for man and man for woman, each for the other, and since this love is inborn in both sexes, it follows that there are marriages in the heavens, just as there are on earth. However, the marriages in the heavens are very different from earthly ones. In the following pages, I will be explaining how marriages in the heavens do differ from earthly ones, and in what respects they agree. Marriage in the heavens is the union of two people into one mind. First, I need to explain the nature of this union. The mind consists of two parts, one called intellect and the other called volition. When these two parts are acting as one, we call them one mind. In heaven, the husband plays the role labeled intellect, and the wife the role called volition. When this union, a union of their deeper natures, comes down into their lower bodily natures, it is perceived and felt as love. That love is marriage love. We can see from this that marriage love finds its source in the union of two people in one mind. In heaven, this is called living together, and they are not called two but one. Consequently, two spouses in heaven are not called two angels but one angel. The reason for this kind of union of husband and wife on the deepest levels of their minds goes back to creation itself. The male is born to focus on cognitive processes and therefore bases his thinking on his intellect. In contrast, the woman is born to focus on intentions and therefore bases her thinking on her volition. We can see this from the tendency or innate nature of each as well as from their form. As to innate nature, men do act on the basis of reason, while women act on the basis of their feelings. As to form, the man has a rougher and less attractive face, a deeper voice, and a stronger body, while the woman has a softer and more attractive face, a gentler voice, and a softer body. This is like the difference between intellect and volition, or between thought and affection. It is also like the difference between what is true and what is good, or between faith and love, since truth and faith are matters of intellect, while good and love are matters of volition. This is why a boy or a man, in the spiritual sense of the word, means the discernment of truth, while a girl or woman means an affection for what is good. It is also why the church is called a woman or a girl on the basis of its affection for what is good and true, and why everyone who is absorbed in an affection for what is good is called a young woman, as in the book of Revelation 14:4. Both man and woman are endowed with intellect and volition, but for men, intellect tends to take the lead, while for women, it is volition that does so, and people are characterized by what is in control. There is no controlling, though, in marriages in the heavens. The volition of the wife actually belongs to the husband, and the intellect of the husband belongs to the wife. This is because each wants to intend and think like the other, mutually, that is, and reciprocally. This is how the two are united into one. This is a truly effective union. The intent of the wife actually enters into the thinking of the husband, and the thinking of the husband enters into the intent of the wife, especially when they look each other in the face, since, as already noted, there is a sharing of thoughts and affections in the heavens. There is all the more sharing between a wife and a husband because they love each other. We may gather from this what the union of minds is like that makes a marriage, and that gives birth to marriage love in the heavens. It is that each wants his or her blessings to belong to the other, and that this is mutual. I have been told by angels that the more two spouses are engaged in this kind of union, the more they are caught up in marriage love, and at the same time in intelligence, wisdom, and happiness. This is because divine truth and divine good, the source of all intelligence, wisdom, and happiness, flow primarily into marriage love. This means that marriage love is the essential matrix for the divine inflow because it is itself a marriage of the true and the good. This in turn is because the nature of the union of intellect and volition determines the nature of the union of the true and the good, because the intellect is a receptor of divine truth, being formed from truths, while volition is a receptor of divine good, and is actually formed from things good. In fact, whatever we intend is good in our estimation, and whatever we understand is true for us. This is why it is all the same whether you talk about the union of intellect and intent, or the union of the true and the good. The union of the true and the good makes an angel and also makes angels' intelligence, wisdom, and happiness. The actual nature of angels depends on how what is true in them is united to what is good, and what is good is united to what is true. In other words, the nature of angels depends on the way their love is united to their faith, and their faith to their love. The reason the divine nature that emanates from the Lord flows primarily into marriage love is that marriage love flows down from the union of the good and the true. For as already noted, it does not matter whether you talk about the union of intellect and volition or the union of the good and the true. The union of the good and the true finds its origin in the Lord's divine love for everyone in the heavens and on earth. Divine good emanates from this divine love, and divine good is accepted by angels and by us in divine truths, truth being the only vessel for the good. So nothing from the Lord and heaven can be accepted by people who are not interested in truth. To the extent that true elements are united to what is good within us, then we are united to the Lord and heaven. This is the actual source of marriage love, which means that it is the actual matrix for the inflow of the divine. This is why the union of the good and the true in the heavens is called the heavenly marriage, and why heaven is compared to a marriage in the Word, and is even called a marriage. It is why the Lord is called the bridegroom and husband, and heaven and the church are called the bride and wife. When the good and the true are united in an angel or in one of us, they are not two entities but one, since the good then follows from the true and the true from the good. This union is like the one that occurs when we think what we intend and intend what we think. Then our thought and our intention form a unity. The thought forms or presents in a form what our volition intends, and our volition gives it its appeal. This is also why two spouses in heaven are not called two angels, but one. Again, this is the meaning of the Lord's words, "Have you not read, that the one who made them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and cling to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but are one flesh. What God has united, let no one sever. Not everyone accepts this word, only those to whom it is given." Matthew 19, 4-6, 11, Mark 10, 6-9, Genesis 2, 24. Here we have a description of the heavenly marriage. Angels are in, and at the same time, the marriage of the good and the true. Let no one sever what God has united means that the good is not to be severed from the true. We can now see from the foregoing where true marriage love comes from, namely, that it first takes form in the minds of the individuals in the marriage and then comes down and flows into their bodies, where it is perceived and felt as love. Actually, everything that is perceived and felt in the body finds its origin in its spiritual counterpart, because it comes from our intellect and volition. Intellect and volition make up our spiritual person. Everything that comes down into the body from our spiritual person comes to view there in some other guise. But there is still a similarity and agreement like that between the soul and the body, like a cause and its effect, as can be gathered from what was presented in the 2 chapters on correspondences. I once heard an angel describe true marriage love and its heavenly pleasures along these lines. It is the Lord's divine nature in the heavens, that is, divine good and divine truth, united in 2 individuals, to the point that they are no longer 2, but 1. The angel said that 2 spouses in heaven are that love because each is her or his own good, and truth in both mind and body. This is because the body is the outward model of the mind, having been formed as its image. It follows that the divine is imaged into people who are immersed in true marriage love, and because the divine is imaged, so is heaven, since the totality of heaven is divine good and divine truth, emanating from the Lord. This is why everything heavenly has this love engraved upon it, along with so many blessings and pleasures that they cannot be numbered. Expressing the number with a word that suggested 10,000s times 10,000s. The angel was astonished that church people do not know anything about this, when the church is the Lord's heaven on earth, and heaven is a marriage of the good and the true. And the angel described being dumbfounded at the thought that adultery was practiced and even rationalized more within the church than outside it, because spiritually understood, and therefore in the spiritual world, the pleasure of adultery is essentially nothing but the pleasure of a love, of the union of what is false and what is evil. This is a hellish pleasure, because it is diametrically opposed to the pleasure of heaven, which is the pleasure of a love of what is true united to the good. Everyone knows that two spouses who love each other are intimately united, and that the essence of marriage is the union of spirits or minds. People might therefore realize that the essential nature of the spirits or minds determines the nature of the union and the nature of the love the two have for each other. The mind is formed from nothing but things that are true and things that are good, since everything in the universe goes back to the good and the true, and also to their union. So the quality of the union of minds depends entirely on the quality of the true and good elements that constitute those minds. This means that the most perfect union is a union of minds formed from things that are genuinely true and good. It does need to be realized that there is no greater love than the love between the true and the good, which is why real marriage love comes down from that love. What is false and what is evil also love each other, but this love later turns into hell. We may conclude from what has been said thus far about the origin of marriage, love just which people are actually involved in it and which people are not. People who are focused on divinely good realities because of divine truths are in marriage love, and marriage love is genuine to the extent that the truths that are united to the good are themselves more genuine. Further, since everything good that is united to truth comes from the Lord, it follows that no one can be in real marriage love who does not acknowledge the Lord and his divine nature, since apart from this acknowledgement, the Lord cannot flow in and be united to the truths within us. We can see from this that people who are caught up in false thoughts are not involved in marriage love, especially if those false thoughts stem from evil. In people who are engaged in evil, and consequently in false thoughts, the deeper levels of their minds are closed. This means that there cannot be any source of marriage love within them. However, on a lower level, in the outer or natural person divorced from the inner, there is a union of the false and the evil, a union that is called a hellish marriage. I have been allowed to see what marriage is like between people who are caught up in false thoughts of an evil origin, which is called hellish marriage. They do talk to each other and even cohabit out of lust, but inwardly they burn with a mutual hatred so murderous as to be beyond description. Marriage love does not occur between people of different religions either, because the truth of one is not in harmony with the good of the other, and two unlike and discordant entities cannot make one mind out of two. This means that the source of their love has nothing spiritual in it. If they do live together in harmony, it is strictly for natural reasons. For this reason, marriages in the heavens are contracted with people within their own community because they are focused on similar kinds of good and truth, and they do not associate with people outside their community. All the people who are within a given community are focused on similar good and truth, and that they differ from people who are outside the community. This was also represented in the Israelite nation by the fact that they contracted marriages within their tribes and even within their clans and not outside them. Any love of control of one over the other utterly destroys marriage love and its heavenly pleasure. For as already noted, marriage love and its pleasure consist of the intent of one belonging to the other, and of this being mutual and reciprocal. A love of being in control in a marriage destroys this because the dominant partner simply wants his or her will to be in the other, and does not want to accept any element of the will of the other in return. So it is not mutual, which means that there is no sharing of any love and its pleasure with the other, and no accepting in return. Yet this sharing and the union that follows from it is the very inward pleasure that is called blessedness in marriage. Love of being in control stifles this blessedness, and with it absolutely everything heavenly and spiritual about the love, to the point that even all knowledge of its existence is lost. One could even say that it is held so cheaply that the mere mention of marriage blessedness makes people laugh or flare up in anger. When one partner wants or loves what the other does, then there is a freedom for both, because all freedom stems from love. However, there is freedom for neither one when there is control. Genuine marriage love is not possible between one husband and more than one wife. Polygamy, in fact, destroys the spiritual source of marriage love, whose purpose is to form one mind out of two. It therefore destroys the deeper union of the good and the true, that is the very essence of that love. Marriage with more than one is like an intellect divided among more than one will, or like a person pledged to more than one church. This actually pulls faith apart so that it becomes no faith at all. Angels say that taking more than one wife is absolutely contrary to the divine design, and that they know this for many reasons, including the fact that the moment they think about marriage with more than one, they are estranged from their inner blessedness and heavenly happiness. They become virtually drunk, because the good is severed from the true within them. And since the deeper levels of their minds come into this kind of state, when they simply think about this with some slight intent, they perceive clearly that marriage with more than one woman closes their own inner nature and makes lust invade where there should be marriage love. Lust leads away from heaven. They added that people on earth have a hard time understanding this because so few do experience true marriage love. And if people are not intent on this, they have absolutely no knowledge of the inner delight that dwells within that love. They are aware only of the delight of lust, a delight that turns disagreeable after people have lived together for a little while. The delight of real marriage love, though, not only lasts into old age on earth, but even becomes heavenly delight after death, when it is filled with a deeper delight that becomes better and better to eternity. The angels even said that the blessings of real marriage love could be listed in the thousands, of which not a single one is known to people here, or comprehensible to the understanding of anyone who is not in a marriage of the good and the true from the Lord. Marriages in the heavens differ from marriages on earth in that earthly marriages are also for the purpose of having children, while this is not the case in the heavens. In place of the procreation of children, there is the procreation of what is good and true. The reason for this replacement is that their marriage is a marriage of the good and the true, as presented above, and in this marriage what is good and true is loved above all, as is their union. So these are what are propagated by the marriages in the heavens. This is why in the word births and generations means spiritual births and generations, births of what is good and true. The mother and father mean the true united to the good that is prolific, the sons and daughters the good and true things that are born, and the sons-in-law and daughters-in-law mean the unions of these descendants, and so on. We can see from this that marriages in the heavens are not the same as marriages on earth. In the heavens, there are spiritual weddings that should not be called weddings, but unions of minds, because of the union of the good and the true. On earth, though, there are weddings, because they concern not only the spirit, but the flesh as well. Further, since there are no weddings in the heavens, two spouses there are not called husband and wife, but because of the angelic concept of the union of two minds into one, each spouse is identified by a word that means belonging to each other. This enables us to know what is meant by the Lord's words about marriages in Luke chapter 20, verses 35 to 36. I have also been allowed to see how marriages are entered into in the heavens. Throughout heaven, people who are similar gather together, and people who are dissimilar part company. This means that every community consists of like-minded people. Like are drawn toward like, not by their own will, but by the Lord. In the same way, spouse is drawn toward spouse, when their minds can be united into one. So at first sight, they love each other most deeply, see each other as married partners, and enter into their marriage. This is why all of heaven's marriages are the work of the Lord alone. They also hold a feast in celebration with many people gathered. These feasts differ from community to community. Marriages on earth are the seedbed of the human race and also of the angels of heaven, for as already noted in its own chapter, heaven is from the human race, for this reason, and because they do have a spiritual origin from the marriage of the good and the true. And because the Lord's divine nature flows especially into this love, these earthly marriages are seen as most holy by heaven's angels. Correspondingly, adultery, as the opposite of marriage love, is seen by them as unholy. For as angels see in marriages a marriage of the good and the true, which is heaven, so in adultery they see a marriage of the false and the evil, which is hell. So if they even hear adultery mentioned, they turn away. This is why heaven is close to people if they commit adultery, because they enjoy it. Once it is closed, the divine being is no longer acknowledged, nor is anything of the faith of the church. I could tell that everyone in hell is opposed to marriage love from the aura that emanated from hell. It was like a ceaseless effort to break up and destroy marriages. This showed that the dominant pleasure in hell is the pleasure of adultery, and that the pleasure of adultery is also the pleasure of destroying the union of the good and the true, the union that makes heaven. It follows from this that the pleasure of adultery is a hellish pleasure, diametrically opposed to the pleasure of marriage, which is a heavenly pleasure. There were some spirits who plagued me with particular ingenuity because of their practice during their physical life. They did this by a rather subtle inflow, almost wave-like, a kind that is characteristic of honest spirits, but I could tell that there were elements of deception and the like within them, intended to ensnare and deceive. Eventually, I talked with one of them who had been in command of an army when he lived in the world, so I was told. Since I could tell that there was something licentious in what he was processing mentally, I talked with him about marriage in a spiritual language, using images, many of them very brief, that expressed my sentiments fully. He said that during his physical life he had thought nothing of acts of adultery. It occurred to me to tell him, though, that acts of adultery are unspeakable, no matter how different and even permissible they may look to people like him, because of the pleasure they are grasping and their consequent rationalizations. He might realize this simply because marriages are the seedbed of the human race, and therefore the seedbed of the kingdom of heaven. Because of this, they should never be violated, but should be regarded as holy. He might also realize this because he must know that he was now in the other life and in a state to perceive that marriage love was coming down from the Lord through heaven, and that mutual love, the foundation of heaven, was derived from that love as from a parent. There was also the fact that when adulterers merely approach heavenly communities, they become aware of their own stench and dive down toward hell. He should at least know that violation of marriage is against divine laws and against the civil laws of all kingdoms, as well as contrary to genuine rational light, because, among many other things, it is contrary to both divine and human order. However, he answered that he had not thought that way during his physical life. He wanted to quibble about whether this was true or not, but he was told that there is no quibbling about the truth. Quibbling favors whatever pleases us, and therefore supports what is evil and false. He should first think about what he had been told, because it was true. Or again, he could start from the principle widely acknowledged in the world that we should not do anything to others that we do not want them to do to us. So if anyone had practiced this kind of deception on his own wife, whom he loved, as is the case in the early stages of every marriage, then when he was at the peak of his blazing rage about it and gave voice to his feelings, wouldn't he himself hold adultery to be detestable? And, being intellectually gifted, wouldn't he of all people defend his condemnation to the point of damning adultery to hell? I have been shown how the pleasures of marriage love lead to heaven, and how the pleasures of adultery lead to hell. The path of marriage love toward heaven led into constantly increasing blessings and delights, until they were beyond number or description. The deeper they were, the more of them there were, and the more indescribable they were, all the way to the delights of the inmost heaven, the heaven of innocence. All this was accomplished with the greatest freedom, because all freedom stems from love. so the greatest freedom comes from marriage love, which is the essential heavenly love. On the other hand, the path of adultery led toward hell, step by step to the very lowest, where there is nothing that is not grim and terrifying. This is the kind of fate that awaits adulterers after their life in the world. By adulterers, we mean people who find pleasure in acts of adultery and not in marriage.